I'm Jim Check.
And I'm Renee Merrifield.
And we're here with Beyond the Ballot and the Prime Minister in Kelowna here, West Kelowna actually, at Gorman's Mill there. And we're going to play a clip from him first here. We're going to play a clip here first, and then we'll get into it here.
Canada's new government has a strong mandate to get big things built faster. And as we build bigger and faster, we will build Canadian, prioritizing Canadian lumber, Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum in Canadian construction. Today, I'm announcing a series of new measures to help the softwood lumber industry pivot to a growing Canadian market. The first pillar is to give our companies that need liquidity, that liquidity in order to address immediate pressures. To do so, we'll provide up to $700 million in loan guarantees. To make the softwood lumber industry more competitive for the long term, we will provide an additional $500 million, largely in grants and contributions to supercharge new product development and new market diversification. Products such as reinforced timber and low-carbon wood fiber-based insulation materials that are used in prefabricated and modular housing. We will be our own best customer by relying more on Canadian lumber, Canadian softwood for Canadian projects.
Is that the guy from Men in Black there on the it's right there? Who is that guy?
No, I thought that was his energy minister, Tim.
It is Tim Hodgson, but what role is he playing there? Like,
I don't know. The one that he forgot the memo, and whatever aide was there at that moment, and if it was Tim Crouppen, he should have said like, "Hey, glasses off, glasses off."
that instills confidence like you wouldn't believe. There's Stephen Fear there on his left there, and Tim Hodgson there on his right, who I guess doesn't want to be seen as part of the Liberal Party. I'm not sure what he's trying to get away with it, because it's not even that sunny out. Like it's like the other two seem to be able to deal with the sunlight there, but obviously Tim not so much. This doesn't amount to much though, because it says provide up to $700 million in loan guarantees. That's like when we've heard from Canfor, you and I've talked about this many times. Canfor says BC is just not a province that's worth investing in. It's not, and it's access to fiber and different things. And then the other one is invest $500 million to supercharge product and market diversification to make the. I mean, it's a lot of really cool words, but that doesn't really say much, right? And then the last one here is use the Canadian government is going to prioritize using Canadian materials. And I know you've got an answer to that.
Yeah, which is like using Canadian steel for our ferries.
The sad reality is, though, like in the past, and just talking about British Columbia, because we've done so many stories on British Columbia, there's been over 10,000 job losses in BC alone in the past 2 years in the forest industry. Canfor cut its planned project in Houston, closed Bear Lake, and then also cut production in Prince George. So AP Planers closed the mill in Merritt. And the complaints from them is BC is not a great place to do for mills, because there's no access to fiber and there's no surety and that kind of stuff. So they're saying that it's just a bad place and they're going south to do their work. And go ahead.
As of October 2024, BC-based companies have spent over $4 billion outside of Canada in terms of capital investments.
Yeah, and then 66% of Canada's total softwood lumber production was exported, and 90% of that goes to the U.S. So that's a big customer to kind of like make up for. And Japan buys raw logs. I mean, that's the thing they always go to. Japan buys raw logs and does their own stuff with the lumber. So where do we find a market for Canadian lumber? And then plus, how do we help these you guys have been, when you were in government there, how do we help these lumber companies actually get access to fiber here in British Columbia?
Yeah, the question is so deep, right? We need a forestry management plan. I know I've been kind of a broken record on that one, but a forestry management plan that actually gives surety to all of these different companies, even the value add companies, even the companies that use the seconds or that use the fiber after it's been harvested to reproduce and put it into other things, even they need that surety that they're going to have the amount of fiber that they require. And right now, the BC government has not given them that. Their annualized cut block it has been relatively stable, 220,000 or so on a year-over-year basis. But if it gets burnt, if it gets if it's in a bad area, if it's not harvestable, there's a lot that goes into figuring out if that number is actually usable or not. So I just want to put it into perspective again. Every year that we have a big forest fire year, which has been 5 out of the last 7 years, we've burned over 300 to 1 million cubic meters. So, I mean, we're talking about massive amounts of fiber that we're burning every single year that we could have for our allowable cut block.
Yeah, and when I interviewed David Eby there, it's got to be like almost a year ago now, we talked about there's a documentary in Merritt that's been done. They can't even get permits to cut the burnt fiber, and you only have so long to cut that stuff down, or otherwise it's unusable. And Eby actually acknowledged the fact that permitting is a problem. And yet there's no talk about permitting in here. There's talking about loans. And then, we're talking about Canfor. I don't think loans is their problem. Access to capital is not their problem. It is access to the fiber. And then, and this obviously is a big problem with these tariffs. If we sell 90% of our softwood exports into the U.S., we need a trade deal. That's what they should be working on. We need a trade deal.
And this was before Trump was even involved. When the NDP took power, we needed a trade deal then. We needed a softwood lumber answer then. And, back when I was still, on the House floor, we criticized the NDP at that time for not having a softwood deal done. And they said, well, it takes time. We're negotiating. Things are not yet in play. There's like other, aspects to it. And I still remember the day that Mike DeYoung stood to his feet and said, I was able to get a deal done in 8 months' time. Like you guys have had 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years as the clock ticked. And still they hadn't completed that. So for Eby to now then say, oh, well, now this is Trump's problem and this is because of Trump, it's simply not true. This is because we did not have a government who prioritized getting an agreement done with the United States. And in doing so has really further sabotaged this particular industry in our province, and an industry that up until last year used to be 3 out of the top 5 exports that BC had as a handle.
Yeah, and also in here they're saying that Canada's new government will double the pace of home building to 500,000 homes a year. But that's fallen short as well, because we just did that story recently. It was a Holiday Home Blacklock story, that their plan to double. Last year, the housing starts were 245,367. Well, this year, it's actually going to come underneath that number. So the housing starts are actually declining. So I don't know how they're going to make up for these 500,000 homes a year, because this year they plan on getting about 237,000 homes.
Yeah, and I mean, that decline is really, really significant. And it's significant for BC in that BC relies on and has relied on it. And inside the budget, the BC government has relied on that number increasing year over year and actually seeing housing starts increase. That means that property transfer tax is going to be down. And the BC government gives over $1 billion for property transfer tax. And when we're not seeing as many resales, when we're not seeing as many housing starts, that number is way less. And that's what we're going to see in the September update for BC in particular.
Mortgage costs are expected to remain elevated, and that's really putting a damper on housing starts as well. And the mortgage costs, or the rates are higher because the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, says that he's worried about tariffs. So the answer again comes back to get a trade deal. Why is government still in recess? Like, Switzerland got some tariffs around, and what did they do right away? They had an emergency meeting. They got all the people together and had a meeting. Where's the meeting? Yeah. Where's the government sitting? Where is like a focus? Like Trump won't even turn his phone calls right now.
Yeah, you and I talked about this on election night and said the most important thing for Carney to do will be get a deal with the US. And he has not done that. Watching the social media and the different political pundits over the weekend, there was two kind of parties or two camps, and those two camps, one said no, it's good for us to not yet have a deal, and then the other camp is like, no, it's very bad for us. And so I do think that we're in a very precarious situation. I've predicted that, if we're last to the table, we're going to get slaughtered. And my fear, I hope, is not coming true. But the longer that this goes on, the worse it's going to be for us.
Yeah, and those two deals, we talked about it last time, those two deals that he made with LNG, especially the European deal, when they were begging us for that same thing, are really starting to make the Liberals look bad. I mean, some of the reporters are even out there starting to tie that together, right? In the deal that was made with Japan. Those are both our deals. They were both begging us for LNG, and we said there was no business case, and it's really looking bad. And still, the most important thing in the world right now is energy, and the most important thing to Canada is energy, and yet there's no talk about energy like an oil and gas pipeline. And that to me is so confusing. And then here we're talking about softwood lumber. I know that softwood lumber is a problem, but energy is our trump card, if you will. And then yet we're not playing that card.
No, and we need to start. I'm going to take it one step further and say that our economy depends on it. You just mentioned Tiff Macklem, and how he's very concerned about inflation and about the tariffs creating more inflation. It's really not the U.S. tariffs. It's any retaliation that we do that's going to create more inflation. It's all of the spending that the government is out of control on right now that is going to really influence that inflation number, and not allow us to have the same flexibility in our economy. You're totally right, Jim, in that we have to get our energy sector firing on all cylinders. Best paying jobs, best productivity numbers that we have, and the most prosperity for its citizens. I do not understand the holdup right now, and simply bolstering companies that have already decided to choose, to invest out of BC and out of Canada doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah, it's maybe a short-term measure, but it's short-term measure at what cost? And and how do we actually move it forward without seeing that have a negative effect on our economy and a drag on our economy?
Yeah, here's the thing. And you've been in government. You phone up Canfor and you say, hey, if we gave you a loan, would you stay? And if the answer is no, that's not the solution, because I bet you the answer is no. But if you say to a bunch of people, hey, we can give you this really cheap loan, you don't actually make lumber at this time, but hey, what about this loan? You don't have to kind of pay it back, and then maybe you start a lumber company, maybe you don't. We'll give you the money, kind of like the battery things that they've invested here in Canada, where they don't actually build anything. But maybe that's where the $700 million go. But I can tell you, the first phone call should be to Canfor and say, do you need a loan? And if they say no, then that's not the solution.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that second $500 million of grants, to really bolster that value add, industry inside of BC and inside of Canada, but then also the value add in the low carbon. And then he gives the insulation as an example in modular building. The issue with modular building is that it's still more expensive than stick frame. Otherwise, we would all be using it in the housing industry. It typically is more expensive. It hasn't had the same time savings that you'd be required in terms of interest costs to really justify the expense. And so, in large part, it might be like a super net zero sort of solution, but that is in an increase of cost. They're building at almost $100 more a square foot than what I can build, a stick frame building. $500 million towards this industry is not going to be the be all end all, and is certainly not going to allow them to get the cost down. What's going to allow them to get cost down is the market, and the market demanding something different. So, again, we're adding more cost to the housing industry. We're adding more cost to the product that the housing industry is creating. And, simply putting it, with the federal government backstop of 500 million of grants is not going to be the answer to seeing that come down.
I think you highlighted a really great point there. 500 million doesn't go very far. So these press conferences are more for the press and for them to push messaging out than they are for actual stoking an economy. It just doesn't make sense. So the one that really sticks to me is like August 1st deadline was a couple days away, and you took that time to recognize Gaza or Palestinian as like its own independent state. Why not wait till after August 1st? Why stick a stick in the American administration's eye? It's almost like you're asking for, because they brought it up too. Lutnick brought it up and said, why would you do that?
And the only thing I can think of is that he's trying to ally himself to the EU rather than to the US. But the reality is that is the last thing that you do, not the first thing that you do. And it's certainly not the way that you can do that. I'd say trade deals with the EU would be a better way to do it. LNG deals with the EU would be a better way to do it, instead of these proclamations and statements. I mean, they're so flawed. They are so flawed in terms of, Hamas has already declared that there is no two-state solution. There is no peaceful solution. There's no solution that actually has, Israel exist. So you're not one for peace here. You're literally promoting, Hamas and Palestine. I think we need to, I think that was a huge misstep, and it was either incompetence on behalf, on Carney's part, or ignorance. But either way, immediately Trump stopped taking our phone calls. Immediately, Trump put out a statement basically saying, stupid move. We're not going to get a deal done as long as you're allied that way. Now, maybe Carney was looking for a scapegoat, and maybe this is a part of a very sophisticated plan. I just don't see it, and I don't see this ending well for us in any way, shape, or form, taking such a dramatic and a powder keg position, where this is.
It's like, I mean, if this is a sophisticated kind of like way to bargain, like I'll eat my hat live here, but because like this is absolutely, to me, like it just seems like it's just bumbling and fumbling and like this press conference here is a whole lot of nothing, and a whole lot of nothing that was delivered, and a whole lot of nothing other than just a press conference in my mind.
Well, and my biggest fear with this press conference is twofold. One is, what you've just said is that we don't have a flying chance of competing. Because if we actually did, you wouldn't be giving us, $1.5 billion to bolster an industry. You'd be actually looking at trade negotiations with other countries. Yeah. So it really says that there is no solution here other than government money. That is not a sustainable solution. That is not a solution in and of itself. Like, that is a stopgap measure when something is so desperately in need of it that it's your last resort. And for me, it signals a real lack of confidence in this particular area. And I think it's a huge blunder economically, long term, and especially when Tiff Macklem is signaling that inflation is going up. That is not the move that you want a government to make. You want them to go into austerity. You want to see them pulling back on costs. And Carney did say that he was going to start cutting things, but so far this is not a cut. This is just more money thrown at literally a dying industry.
And no trade deals. Like, we see other countries announcing deals because, he's going to, I think he was banking on the European Union and the UK, both which signed deals with the United States. But where's our trade deal? Like, if he would come out on this podium and said, yeah, Japan's going to buy all our lumber. So great. That'd be huge, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't have to worry about it. We got to deal with whoever to buy our lumber. Well, we don't.
Exactly.
And then it's just more money. If we look at our industry, media, the government's been helping the media here in Canada for a couple of years. They're government-funded media. In that time, 400 outlets have failed across Canada, and more are failing all the time. And this Bill C-18 continues to suppress media, and the government doles out more money to the ones they select. Government money is not the answer. Government money sometimes to stoke something, like to kind of like spark something, but not to keep stuff on life support so they're at the begging bowl all the time asking for more crumbs.
And it used to be the case, like even the former Liberal governments, if you look at Christian, if you look at Paul Martin, the goal of that government, of those governments, was always to save enough money during the good times to bolster during the bad times. But our governments have gone the exact opposite. They've spent like drunken sailors in the good times, and when we actually had an economy, when we had a housing market, when we had they've just spent and spent and spent and created such government bloat that now in the bad times, when things start teetering, their answer is, okay, we're gonna spend more, but there isn't more to spend. I mean, we're literally talking about governments going into insolvency at some point because they can't pay their interest payments. When you start having, like, you know, in the case of BC, you know, the Ministry of Interest, if it was a ministry, you know, is the fourth largest ministry in the province. That's a scary time. You know, and if people understood how much money was going to spend on the interest that, you know, government doesn't have, and you know, we're seeing predictions right now from the BC chief economist, you know, that BC is going to post 16 to 18 billion dollars of a deficit this year. That is scary times, and like sound the alarm bell times. And this federal government is predicting about 45 to 60 billion. Again, very scary. And we don't even have a budget. You know, at least with the BC government, we have a budget. With the federal government, we don't have a budget yet. And so they're just spending, as they want to, rather than with any level or measure of accountability. Now, it's up to the public to hold those government officials to account. And thank goodness that people got upset about the BC Ferries, because that's $1 billion of federal money that's going towards that. So there is a level of measure that the Canadian public is starting to hold, with this government.
Before we get into BC Ferries, let's talk about BC healthcare. Harman Bangu put out this tweet here. And this was just really affecting Lillooets and Olivers and 100 Mile houses and that. But now it's the Lower Mainland. And it's the Lower Mainland that we're starting to see these hospitals get hit. This is Mission Memorial. And then there was also another one here, Delta. And then this weekend, Oliver. And this is now spreading into the Lower Mainland. And I'm sure there's going to be people making noise in the Lower Mainland because, you know, like, sure, it's Oliver, it's Lillooet, the government kind of ignored it. You know, we got a lot of attention when all of a sudden KGH, you broke that story, the KGH with the pediatric unit closed, and all of a sudden that was like a huge thing. But now, Lower Mainland closing ER departments, and that's so important. ER is so important to just healthcare. Like, that's emergencies. You go in there with, you know, an emergency, and the department's closed, and that includes ambulances. Like if they're en route with a gunshot wound or whatever, and they said, well, don't come here, go somewhere else.
Yeah, it used to be that emergency rooms anywhere were not allowed to close. They were the department of last resort. They were like basically like your central nervous system, if it were of your body. Like they were just not allowed to ever have shortages, and they were bolstered in such a way that they wouldn't. That has changed under this government. This is now allowable. It is now almost commonplace anywhere in the rural and remote emergency rooms. The fact that it's hitting the Lower Mainland, I'm very grateful for, because we need to start having these big news stories. Because just recall, like when rural and remote ERs get shut down, well, then they get shipped to the regionals, which is like your Kelowna, your Kamloops, you know, your Prince George. And when those get shut down, then they start going to the Lower Mainland. And that's where you get your Vancouver Generals or your St. Paul's. And that's where they're, you know, airlifted to next. This is scary because these are hospitals that now are going to be overloaded by the Lower Mainland hospitals that are closed. So we just do not have capacity in those systems. And it's not for lack of, you know, specialists. I've been told by many specialists that there's enough to go around. But what happens is that these specialists are not given the amount of OR time, they're not given the amount of support staff, and that largely, they're held at bay, as it were, and there's this rationing of all the costs that is happening in the medical system, and I think that we as public, again, we need to sound the alarm bell. We need to get loud. We need to start telling our stories. I ran into a physician who lives in my neighborhood, and he was saying, oh my goodness, like it's worse than everyone thinks it is, and if they actually knew how bad it was, I think that we would see a lot more anger when it comes to this. And I think that this is, I predicted it. I think that this is going to be the story of the next 5 years.
And you know what? To me, it's all about prioritizing, and they bragging this weekend on the Carney Liberal and the Liberal Party, bragging that like this is only the second Prime Minister to march in a Pride parade. Great on that, march in the Pride parade all you want, but there's some stuff that there's a lot of stuff on fire here in this country, and the trade deal should be they should go into a room and not come out of that room till they have how union negotiations. Don't come out of that room till you have a deal. They don't leave the room, and that includes everybody that can make the deal. That's Carney. Make deals with other countries, make deals with whoever, but don't leave the room until you make a deal. No, there's no time for jaunting all over the country, doing these know nothing or do nothing kind of press conferences and marching in parades and stuff, because it seems to me that's all populist movements and it's just kind of driving that base or whatever, but it doesn't help the nation.
Yeah, I think we need to get back to the fundamentals. The virtue signaling is kind of tired, and really, we have. Case in point, there was a Pride parade going on in Vancouver. We have a lot of attention being drawn to, to different groups, which is great. It's a positive in terms of, let's give a real celebration on how far we've come in these particular areas. But that doesn't require a prime minister's attention anymore. What does are the theoretical fires that are going on everywhere. The things like our economy, our trade, our supply chains, our international negotiations, our relationships with our foreign affairs and our other countries that are here. There is so much work to be done that this is not what I would have been spending my weekend doing. But it has become this virtue signal, kind of flag. Unfortunately, I saw as many negative posts going around about his attendance as positive, and it's not homophobic and very anti gay or anything like that. It was just more, this is our prime minister. This is what he chooses to do. There are more important
priorities.
things.
It's about priorities. And then the priority number one, Ford had that, quality is job one. The economy is priority one. And it seems like it's not, right? Even right now, Francois, the photo op guy of Canada cabinet, and Anita Nunn are heading to Mexico to do a deal. After they insulted the Mexicans, how many times, right? I'm sure she's like, yeah, let's get a deal done. And look who's going where, right? Do you know what I mean? Look who's going where. And again, they're sending low-level, I guess they say senior cabinet ministers, but low-level people to do a deal. It's not Claudia and Mark doing a deal. It's, a couple of low-level people going there to do a photo op with, I don't know what they're doing, right? And no. Mexico and the U.S., they got an extension, and it seems like they're doing more and more, and that deal's getting stronger there for Mexico. And also Mexico is the United States' biggest trading partner now, and we are no longer the number one trading partner.
Yeah, I think that you're right, and that it signals that the power center is clearly Mexico, not Canada. But as well, you look at some of the best negotiators that we've had as prime ministers in the past, whether it's Chrétien or whether it's Harper. Those gentlemen actually knew how to get deals done. And yes, they would come with their, pomp and ceremony with their trade ministers, flanking them. And the trade minister would be meeting while there was a lot of attention being driven around, the head leaders' meetings. And it was an amazing way to get it done. I don't think anyone in our history as prime minister got as many trade deals done as Harper did in his 9 years as prime minister. So I do think that, look to the ones that did it really well. This is not the case in this particular, and it seems more like, it might just be for show and for the political gain rather than for an actual deal to get done.
You're a fan of Sam Cooper, and we got a little clip here to play here. We're going to talk about the BC Ferries now.
The worst of us that have sold out to get where they are too often in power in Canada. And to what you're saying, yeah, I do think that some very smart people around the world are realizing, you couldn't make it up in Hollywood that someone like Premier David Eby and BC Ferries are giving a $1 billion ferry deal funded under the table by an Ottawa bank, basically, a development bank. It's an old story that we've covered in many ways, but just to get to the point, people like David Eby now are a very strong national security risk to North America. There's no way to sugarcoat this from the way that he's giving away. And I know you come from a First Nations background.
Stop it there. Yeah, we're going to talk about that BC Ferries thing, but...
Yeah, Sam Cooper has been very critical of Eby in terms of how he got his rise to power. He definitely has a lot to say about his affiliation with, Chinese organizations and how they have infiltrated the BC process in terms of whether it's leadership runs or whether it's actual wins provincially. And I'm not speaking out of turn. Sam Cooper has done a tremendous amount of research on this. Bob Mackin is another journalist who's done a tremendous amount of research on this. Simply go to their pages and start reading. They're not making allegations. They're actually just giving you the facts, and you can come to whatever allegations you want to. But then to see a $4 billion deal go to the Chinese government is a pretty big deal. And especially when we do have the capacity to do it, but we couldn't do it on the terms that were given by the RFP. That's where it gets hinky. Because if you have proponents that you want to win, the way that you get them to win is by creating the RFP in such a way that only they can fulfill it. And that's essentially what the Eby government did through BC Ferries, and I think that it deserves the scrutiny that it's getting, and thank goodness that Dan Albus is taking this to committee. But will we get answers? I'm not sure. But I mean, Sam Cooper is kind of a dog on a bone on this one, and he's not letting Eby off easily.
No one should let this one go. So Dan Albus, he says you'll be shocked to learn that, because that vote for this committee hearing was 5-4. And you'll be surprised to learn that it was for the Liberals that voted against. You would think the Liberals, this is their opportunity to show Canada, build strong, use money for Canadian. This is one where they should actually be calling out the NDP, but they're not. They're actually, I watched the questioning by Dan Albus there with Chrystia Freeland, and she just kind of stonewalled, gave these nonsensical answers, and just... You'd think that because this is not going to look good. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
I just say again, and I know I've said this too much, and if I sound like a broken record, I apologize, but believe what politicians do, not what they say. We just saw Carney at the beginning of the show stand up in his press conference this morning and talk all about how it's buy Canadian, buy Canadian, buy Canadian. Nice. And then we see, Chrystia Freeland write this letter and say, can you guys please reconsider this contract? And can you please buy it from Canada and bolster, the Canadian shipbuilding industry? You see Eby stand up and say, shipbuilding is one of our core industries that we want to see, empowered in this next, term of his government. And then you see 4 Liberals vote against actually getting to the bottom of how this decision was made, and you see the Eby government giving a $4 billion contract to China. Their actions are telling you what they believe about the situation and what they actually want to happen in this situation. So I just think that, we need to be eyes wide open, and as a general public, believe what they are doing, not what they stand into a press conference and say.
Yeah, so we did send a reporter out, and we'll see what we got an answer. We're going to ask the question. One of the questions we wanted to ask was to Mark Carney, if it's build Canada strong, use Canadian steel and aluminum, how do you continue to justify the loan to the BC NDP for the ferries built in China? Ian told me, though, this morning he was watching a press conference with Eby there, or somebody shooting a video, and he was standing there looking in the binoculars out into the harbor there, and he's seen a ferry there, and he said, oh, look, that one's not made by China. But where's the media asking the question? This question has not been posed to Carney, or he has not answered the question. This should be on the top of mind. Build Canada strong, steel and aluminum. These are the things. These are the areas that are getting hurt, and that question is not being asked by the government-funded media right now.
Totally. And, you know, these are the things that a prime minister should be focused on, is stimulating the economy and making sure all of these infrastructure dollars, when we are suffering as an economy, when, you know, when we're teetering on the brink of recession, and when we're totally in recession, when you do, per capita GDP. So when we're in recession, these are exactly the moments that a government should step in and say, wait, no, we want those $4 billion to stay inside of our boundaries, inside of our borders, and actually stimulate our economy. So the fact that it's not needs a strong prime minister to say, hold the phone, we're not going further, we need this to stay here, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, that comment that he made there, like, you know, like joke or whatever that's supposed to be, look, that one's not made in China, either shows that he's extremely weak, and then that's his way to handle his weaknesses by making a joke of it, or he just doesn't care. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense, because that shouldn't be something to make light of, because if you're on your podium, because you see what's on the podium there, build Canada strong, all these things, all these buzzwords, like you say, the talk is a lot different than the actions. That should be just like he should put down the hammer and say, that loan is recalled, and I want those jobs back in BC right now. You recall that right now.
And think about how popular he would be. There is no negative in that situation.
No.
Like, that is the best situation that a prime minister could have. He'll get great publicity about trying to stimulate the economy. He'll have great publicity from the unions who represent the shipbuilders. He'll have great publicity from the general public who don't want to see $4 billion given to China. Like, and the steel industry. Oh my goodness, another win. You know, I just can't see the negative here for him. And the fact that, you know, Chrystia Freeland is writing a letter saying, please don't go to China. And on the other hand, you know, sitting in committee stage, voting against, you know, having her party members vote against actually doing a deep dive, and then not having an answer saying, like, yeah, you're right, we want this to stay here, is just ridiculous to me. And a real missed opportunity for Carney to establish himself as a new presence for our economy moving forward, and a real miss for Eby, because I think this is going to haunt him for a long time.
So Dan Elbas couldn't get a straight answer, so he wants the loan documents, and they have up until August 29th to release the documents to the committee. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that and how much redaction will be in there, and if there is redaction, like, what would be the logic for redaction? Because there's no security issues there that you would think of. Like, I can't see any reason. If anything, the security risk is giving it to them in the first place.
I was going to say, you know, any government that wants to keep a secret from me and keep a secret with China, I think is a little bit scarier.
That would be telling, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be telling? And the CEO, I listened to his explanation too, of the BC Ferries there, saying that, you know, like, you know, these are the reasons that we picked China, and one of them was cost. Again, if cost is one of your things, how can Canadian companies compete when they don't have an industrial carbon tax? They can use slave labor and tons of human rights violations, and they can use inferior steel and aluminum. How do you compete?
And this is, I mean, that very phrase and that very reasoning is, is further proof that what we are doing is not working, and we are not competitive on a global stage. You know, the fact that the U.S. can produce the LNG, the fact that we can't buy our own ships that are built here, you know, is just proof that our government has created a lack of competitive environment for our businesses. And that's why the Canfors of the world are taking their marbles and going and investing them in Arkansas instead of here.
If you just a question, political clout, do you think the European Union has more political clout than Canada?
Oh, yes, 100%.
And then if you look at Ursula there in that meeting with Donald Trump, completely subservient to the Americans there, taking that LNG deal, a deal that should have been our deal. And this is the posturing in Canada that we're going to defeat the Americans. There was a tweet by one of the politicians here in Canada saying that, you know, like, the United States is falling into a deep, dark hole, and, you know, they're going to isolate themselves and all this stuff, and where Canada is going to be the superpower with the European Union. I'm just like, how deluded are you to think that, when look at the deals that are being made, look at the deals that are happening. And then like, are you living in delusion, or what's going on? Here's a graph here to look at, for the deluded. Exports of steel and aluminum.
Yeah.
And then you'd say, well, we could use that to build ferries. No, we can't.
Exactly. And China's not going to be using our steel. So, it's Canada's in a really precarious position. I don't think that we have a lot of strength. We don't have a lot of strength on a global level. We don't have a lot of strength, with our neighboring jurisdictions. And I think that we need to get very, very serious about how we're going to right this ship. And I just don't see it happening right now. I see trinkets going out from Carney rather than a real plan and a real solid initiative forward. And platitudes are not going to get us to where we need to go. People are going to start losing their jobs. And companies cannot keep holding on, in this type of an environment. And investment dollars are fleeing. And I mean, we talked about those in our last show, and just the order of magnitude. I mean, $13.4 billion left Canada in the month of May alone, a $2.8 billion deficit. This is scary times for us. And I know that we keep saying that the U.S. tariffs are going to hurt the United States more than they're going to hurt other places. Sure, we saw the bobble on the jobs number in July. We see inflation going up. They haven't been able to lower their interest rates. Absolutely. And you know what? The American people don't seem to care. And the reason that they don't seem to care is because they've got super cheap energy and they've got great paying jobs. Their GDP per capita is way higher than ours. So you know what? They don't care because their money is still going farther than what ours is going. So yeah, inflation can go up, but if their jobs are going, their pay wages are going up by higher than that, they don't really mind. And that's exactly what the GDP per capita shows. So, I mean, we have a ways to go. And I mean, I heard Trump this morning just going on about how great it was and how his economy is going great and gangbusters. I mean, the reality is there are more investment dollars going into the United States than from Canada than coming into Canada. So people still see the U.S. as a better environment, and his big, bad, beautiful bill or whatever it was, you know what? It did really well for companies. And I've talked to business owners down there in the States, and they're loving life right now. So,
and those are the facts. And those are the facts. And there's no disputing the facts, because Mark Carney himself, where's his investment money, his personal investment money? 93% of it's in the United States. Where's Brookfield? Moved to the United States to access capital. So, I mean, these people that say these other things are just deluded. We need to make Canada look like a great investment place. And here's this Pierre Poilievre calling this out here, saying the Liberals' $750 billion, it is a $750 billion gift to Trump. Add the $1 trillion gift to the Japanese that we gave them. And you can look at this in the power position there that's sitting there. You know what I mean? It's just that. The European Union ruined themselves with energy. Ian, which you on this show here, and you've talked to Ian many times, moved back to England for a while. And, he's a professional. He had to choose which hours he could have heat on in the United Kingdom. That's how bad it is in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. And we don't get that.
Bad energy policies. And yeah. This is what they get for. And then here's Pierre Poilievre, one more thing, a tweet there he put out there. This is what we've got so far, is the second highest unemployment in the G7.
Yeah, and that's not a great statistic, especially because we have so many industries that could be firing on all cylinders, and instead, we're looking at an unemployment rate that's brutal. And I'll draw attention to the United States on that graph as well. We're wondering why people are having such an issue with the tariffs here and not an issue there. Well, they have jobs.
Good paying jobs. Yeah. And here's one where we break it down. Brian Lilly from the Toronto Star there, breaking it down. And in Ontario too, the unemployment rate for youth is in the 20% mark. And world organizations have called out Canada on its bad immigration policies, and even compared it to modern-day slavery by flooding the country with really cheap labor. Lots of unions have spoken out about it too. But our youth is suffering from massive immigration here in Canada, and so is our healthcare. We're seeing it in BC here with ER closures.
Yeah, there was a great headline that said, that we've cost our youth, immigration has cost our youth their first job. And I think that's very true. I mean, my first job taught me how to work hard. I waited tables. I started as a hostess in a restaurant. I started with a paper route, and then worked up into, waiting tables. And man, I used to always say, if I lost everything tomorrow, I'd go back to waiting tables, because if you do a great job and make people, happy throughout their meal, you can make a lot of cash, in a very short amount of time. And, we've robbed our youth from being able to do that same aspect of really like getting their first jobs and doing a great job. And I don't think our immigration has helped us, in the ways that we thought it would. It was unbridled. It was very undisciplined. And, case in point that we have so many criminals amongst us that we can't find and we don't know where they are anymore, I think is case in point. I think that we saw a really poor immigration policy that has flooded our market and I think is costing our economy overall.
One of the things Poilievre said, he wants to really stem the flow of immigration, actually go down in net population till we can get our services back to where they need to be. And if you go watch CNN right now, CNN, not a fan of Trump there, actually said that the United States might see a net negative population growth this year. And also called, this is unbelievable for CNN, called Trump the most influential president of this century and likely into most of the last century with all the things that he's been able to accomplish. And I know that's going to make a lot of the left-leaning people lose their minds. But, it's time to start using your common sense and look what's actually happening than listening to what the media is trying to tell you that's happening. And then look at who's funding that media, because in Canada, we have a very biased media. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Very biased media. I try and listen every day, but sometimes I just get upset knowing what the other half of the story is or the other 3/4 of the story is. So I really encourage Canadians to take a look at their own lives. Is your money going as far as it should? Can your kids afford housing? Are your parents getting great health care, or are you thinking about sending them to the States? There are no good answers right now coming for Canadians. And I mentioned that the recruiters are out, soliciting our citizens to other countries. But they're, our kids are going as willing participants. And I think if Carney doesn't try and right the ship very quickly, we're gonna have to see a different outcome to the next election, or he will.
Well, think about this. We have unemployment in the 20s for youth. The most youth.
I wonder why they're mad.
And
most
youth can't afford a home or even think they'll ever be able to afford a home. So they're disenchanted, disenfranchised, and they don't think the government cares. And we're now starting to see the numbers are coming through that conservatives are basically, that's where the youth, that's where they're growing their movement. And the people that really like the Liberals are the boomers. And because they're happy and content, and they would sell out the youth for that. And this is the latest thing that's being pushed by the media right now, is this saying that more Canadians would like to join the EU. And I think people need to look and see what's happening at the EU. You're going from one mess to another.
Totally. Yeah, it's the EU is not the strength that I think that we should be looking towards. And that I don't think is going to do what people think it's going to do. I think that the first thing I would look at is how many dollars our dollars are worth in the EU, and how quickly that would fade, in terms of our wealth or our prosperity. So, yeah, our dollars would go less far if we were part of the EU.
This is a simple sentence for every politician. It's all about the economy, period. Energy is our trump card.
Yes.
The rest is easy, right? The rest is easy.
The rest is really easy. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't get it. Why don't they just say, again, I've been part of some of these negotiations where you just say, okay, we're going to sit in a room till we have a deal. LeBlanc and all the rest of them should say, it's not, some junket somewhere where they're sitting there getting drunk or whatever. It's you're in this room till we get a deal.
Totally. And it's, there's a lot of work to do to get that to that place. But right now we don't have a government that's doing that work.
But telling Canadians that we don't need the Americans, we don't need this, we don't need that. The softwood lumber one is a really good example. 90% of our exports go to the United States. Where else were you going to sell that lumber? Because we're not building houses because our interest rates are too high. And Tiff Macklin says, well, we don't want to lower them. I don't understand how the guy still has his job, but hey, that's me, right?
Well, and CMHC is pulling back on all of the different funding opportunities. So you're going to see a huge pullback on rental. You're going to see a huge pullback on market because there is no market right now. You're seeing developers literally laying off, 20 to 30% of all their staff in the Lower Mainland, and I mean here there are 3 different developers that all laid off, 25% of their staff. So you're seeing a massive pullback, and so we don't need Carney to come in and say like we're going to build houses. It's like no, the very metrics of house building doesn't work right now. So fix the metrics, which is find us new supply chain, find us new trading partners, lower the bureaucracy, it's the same thing with the ferries, right? Like, well, the cost is prohibitive, so we're going to go to China. Well, the cost of building houses is prohibitive, so we're going to build them ourselves as a federal government. It's like, no, you've missed the boat. Just make it less expensive, and you're going to see a whole bunch built.
Our trump card is energy, and it's something that Tim Hodgson with the glasses there doesn't seem to want to just do a deal. Just do a deal. Anyway. Yeah. It's been an hour, and it's been great as usual. And, if the Carney Liberals want to take any of our ideas, they're free for the taking,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Renee. And thank you for watching NowMedia.
We don't just report the news. We live here, too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence.